talking about implementing Part 141 standards in Part 61 schools. This is intended to be a short safety workshop, so we'll head through it. All right, so one of the problems that I'm looking to address is with Part 61 safety standards. So while Part 61 does give students and instructors a high degree of freedom in training, there's no FAA oversight or requirement for any type of safety program. Right now, we are in the age of organizational accidents. So that means we're moving away from just general skills-based and pilot error accident reporting and looking deeper into the organizational factors that influence today's accidents. So my proposed solution for this is that Part 61 flight schools should implement, as far as practical, some of the safety programs and initiatives, but more importantly, the culture of Part 141 schools. So this will provide you the benefit of a solid safety culture without the burden of formal overregulation. All right, so what's the big difference between Part 61 and 141? So we can see on our screen here just a short bullet pointed difference. So Part 141 has FAA oversight. So this starts with record keeping and ends with some kind of safety policy that's written, whereas Part 61 doesn't have that. That's not to say that no Part 61 school has these types of programs in place, but there's no mandate and no FAA oversight. Training in Part 141 is generally more structured compared to Part 61, which allows instructors to tailor the training syllabus to individual students. There's also lower hour requirements compared to Part 61 in Part 41 schools. There's a little asterisk here because while there might be lower hour requirements, it doesn't necessarily mean you'll finish quicker. It just means that the mandatory minimums are lower. There's another asterisk in Part 61 because in some programs, the training requirements are as required rather than a set number of syllabus hours. So there's a lot of give and take here. I want to kind of point that out because I don't think any one particular route is quicker than the other. I think there's advantages and disadvantages to both. One of the downsides of Part 141 students from schools from a student's perspective is they're generally more expensive because they have more overhead. Part 161 school doesn't necessarily have to be a school. It can be a guy in an aircraft conducting training. So bringing us neatly to aircraft. So 141 schools, generally because of their higher budgets, they tend to have newer, better equipped aircraft compared to their Part 61 counterparts. It's arguable as to whether that is a positive or a negative. I think there's downsides to both. So with newer aircraft that are just stuffed full of technology, I think students are getting away from managing aircraft and managing systems instead. Whereas with the older aircraft, the focus is generally on the foundational skills of flying. You're not messing with the G1000. You're not worried about electric flaps failing or trim or autopilot or any of that stuff. So I think there are some different areas of focus when it comes to safety between the two. Just kind of stating they have unique requirements. So we'll take the good from 141 and apply it to the 61, and we'll see where that takes us. So why is this a problem? So currently, general aviation accidents account for 95% of aircraft fatalities. Out of that, 14% comes directly from flight training, and solo students out of that 14% represent more than half of the training accidents. So we can dive deeper into the why behind it. I think there is a variety of factors that contribute to these high numbers, but I think not having a good safety culture is definitely a contributing factor. Right? Some gaps that we've identified. We've got the common safety risks that are inherently present by not having a solid risk management system in place and by not incorporating a safety culture into training. There's obviously a lack of a formalized SMS in a lot of the smaller schools. And this is due to the lower amount of capital and staff, right? So having a robust safety system has historically meant having a safety department, a safety manager, a lot of paperwork. So I want to argue that that is not a requirement to make everybody's life a little bit safer. So let's start off with defining what safety culture is. All right, so I took this out of a paper that I read. It's, I think, great. And they define safety culture as the set of enduring values and attitudes regarding safety issues that are shared by every member of every level of an organization. So from the CEO down to the custodial staff, safety is a key factor. So in larger organizations, this means a lot of people need to be on board. For smaller Part 61 schools that might have a couple owners, a few instructors, and a handful of students, I think it's easier to implement this type of culture just by the fact that there's less people involved in it. All right, so let's start by going through the safety culture definition. So in order to have a true safety culture, we need a few different types of cultures. The first one is a just culture. By its definition, it fosters learning and not blaming. We encourage reporting. We have acceptable standards versus unacceptable. And at its core, a just culture aims to build trust between students, instructors, and management staff. This culture also needs to be flexible, right? We need to adapt to change. We need to empower, in this case, not only the workers, right? Not just the CFIs, but especially the students to speak up if they feel that there's something that should be reported as a safety issue. And primarily, I think the biggest one is, hey, I don't feel safe doing that. Because as our level of skill grows, we tend to forget what it's like to be in our first solo, or even just in the aircraft by ourselves for the first time, right? So at larger schools, generally from pre-flight to landing, you've got 2 or 3 people around you double checking things. I think we often forget the pressure that even a solo pre-flight is on a student and the amount of double checking that there should be. Again, these issues are addressed with safety culture. A flexible culture is also dynamic, right? Things change. The biggest of these is weather for pilots, but there's also a lot of other factors, especially internal factors, when we look at, for instance, the I'm Safe checklist. So as we go through that, we've got everything from illness down to emotional states. So we have to be flexible enough to identify and adapt our policy to meet all of those different needs. And again, it's important to build trust, right? So flexibility means, in this case, being able to say to the CFI, hey, maybe we add a even bigger margin of safety, right? Maybe if steep spirals have to be completed by 1,500 feet, maybe we give ourselves 2,000 and kind of build that into the culture to where we always train at the highest level with the highest possible margin of safety. Third, the culture needs to be a learning culture, right? So we need to foster continuous improvement. We need to learn from accidents, and I mean this especially other people's accidents, right? Obviously, we're going to try and learn things from our own accidents, but what can we learn from accidents outside of our organization, and how can we proactively implement that kind of stuff into our culture, right? The learning culture also promotes training and education. So safety stand-downs are common in the military. There's no reason that we can't have those at a smaller school. Meetings once a week. Hey, what did we learn this week? How did X affect Y, and how did that have a negative effect on safety? And probably the most important one out of these is a continuous feedback loop, right? So learn, adapt, improve, go back. And we'll address that cycle a little bit later on when it comes to a more formalized SMS. And the final piece of a just culture is that, or of a safety culture, is having a robust reporting culture. This means open lines of communication, proactive risk management, systemic improvements, right? So we need to look at the system rather than the individual error to see where we can improve. And we need to analyze our reports. So whether that's keeping a spreadsheet or even just a suggestions box, however you choose to do it, there needs to be some kind of analysis with the reporting. There's nothing worse than submitting reports and seeing no action, because over time, that just means, why am I doing this at all, right? So when we have a safety culture, we've got an enduring set of values and attitudes. So an informed culture, as Reasons states, it is a safety culture, and it's cornerstoned by a couple different things, right? The culture is holistic, right? We care about the individual and the actual organization as a whole. We're proactive, analytical, and it's continuous. Safety culture isn't just about writing a policy, sticking to it, and being done with it, right? There's continuous improvement. All right, so let's dive a little bit deeper into what is SMS. So SMS stands for the Safety Management System, and we'll work through this definition together, right? But SMS is a formal top-down organization-wide approach to managing safety risk and assuming the effectiveness of safety risk controls. What a mouthful. All right, so that's great, but what does this mean? All right, so formal, right? Write it down, make it a policy, make it mandatory. Top down, we have management leading by example and not just writing policy, right? So if, for instance, we've decided that our policy is before each flight, we can complete a risk management assessment. If your leaders aren't doing the same thing when they hop in the airplane, students are going to see that and they're going to throw it in the trash and say, well, Bob's not doing it. He's the guy that owns a flight school. Why should I? Most importantly, management provides support. When there's an issue, safety stuff comes first. So if a student comes with a safety concern, we address that concern. We don't kick it to the next day or the next week. We kind of prioritize that. To be organization-wide, this means being cross-departmental, from maintenance to flight ops to dispatching. Everyone kind of looks out for each other. So if the dispatcher notices someone's not feeling too well, they say, hey, let's take a look. Let's talk about it. Have you checked out your risk assessment? Are you good to fly today? Right? We want to take care of each other, and we want to be active in doing it. And it needs to be genuine, right? We all obviously care about one another. I think in aviation, this is a really big thing, is the community of caring that we have, right? We want to manage risk. We look for risks actively, and we try and stay vigilant of new risks. So every day there's a new risk out there. It could be something as simple as a crosswind, a new TFR, an aerobatic box being open, all of these things. And again, we're doing this organization wide. So we've got everybody looking out and saying, hey, did you remember that there's jumpers today? Hey, did you remember there's a TFR today, right? So it's all about managing risk. And then the final point, assuring effectiveness. The only way we can assure continued effectiveness is by constant reevaluation. So we need to make sure that we're living in a just culture, and that it's very clear that an SMS is a living set of documents. It's not just a one-time policy. All right. So some of the factors that are included, right? It includes systematic procedures, practices, and policies for the management of safety risk. All right, another wonderful dose of word salad here, right? So what does this mean? All right, so for our safety policy, the key points, I'm trying to do my best to bold them out here, but we've got management commitment. Management sets clear safety objectives. There's a commitment to manage those objectives, and we effectively define all the methods and processes that we need to meet our goals. Another key is that the policy is transparent. There aren't any hidden gotchas, right? If something is black or white, we've got it clearly written down and described. The next section is risk management, right? So risk management isn't just a sheet of paper. Again, all of this stuff is living, but it's a formal process where we describe, identify, assess, analyze, and control. And here we come to the continuous process. We're constantly reevaluating what works, what new hazards there are, how we address them, how we control them. Aviation is inherently risky. Despite what what the magazine says, general aviation flying is not safer than driving, especially not flight training. I think it's one of the most hazardous activities out there, right? We're learning a new skill that requires 400% of our attention and absorbing massive amounts of information, with the stick and rudder skills being the smallest part of that, right? So we need to continuously analyze everything, to make sure that we stay relevant and that our risk management process is up to date. The third step is we've got safety assurance, right? This is where we just want to make sure, again, that we're continuously auditing ourselves. We're looking for new information. We're seeing how other people handle that information. And we're learning from everyone's errors and everyone's successes. All right, the final step is safety promotion. So obviously we have a safety policy, we've got all these wonderful things, but we need to get it out there. And we need to get it out there in a positive way. So we need to train, right? So a lot of how we do things, we also need to provide a safety education, right? So it's not enough to simply say, this is how we do X, right? We want to make sure that everyone understands the why we do X, right? Because once we understand the why, people are a lot more likely to make it personal, and want to participate. We want to make sure that we're continuously advocating for a positive safety culture. And there's a variety of ways to do that. I mean, you can do giveaways, you can do newsletters. There's a lot of stuff that's out there, to just make sure that safety is constantly on everybody's mind without just being a meaningless slogan. For me, probably the most important one out of this list is the disseminating safety lessons learned. When we learn something, we need to share it. If I learn something and I don't share it with my wingman or my co-pilot or my manager, right? Have we learned anything? No. I've learned something, but sharing it is a big part of safety culture, right? Because we all have a role in it. All right, so great. We now have a good safety management system, right? I don't think so. So for this one, I really like a verse out of Matthew 7. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. So taking this to safety, we can say and do all of these things all day long. But what happens when something happens, right? The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew, beat against the house, and it fell with a great crash. The most important part of an SMS is that we build it on a good foundation, right? So just like Matthew talks about building your house on a rock, in this case, we need to build our safety management system on top of a good safety culture. If we don't have a just culture that's learning, flexible, and good at reporting, right, we've essentially just have a bunch of paper. And paper does not keep anyone safe. Paper is just paper, right? So how do we go about implementing this in 141 schools? So there's no legal requirement from the FAA to make SMS a requirement in 141 schools, but FAA's Order 8901, which is essentially the outline of how to certify a Part 141 flight school, has some good guidance for that, right? And again, SMS is most effective when we build it on existing safety processes and practices. This is something that 141 schools excel in because of the structured syllabus and everything that's required, which goes based off of the ACS, which has safety built into it. So for a 141 school, incorporating safety into the culture is kind of done by default, because they have to meet these stringent standards. So let's take a look at those. So as part of the 141 certification process, we see that there is a requirement for developed safety procedures and practices, and they do want paperwork, right? So you do have to define some form of safety. when we look at the accidents that have occurred, we can kind of see uh, the breakdown of what contributed to the accident. So for right now, we're taking the unsafe acts out of it and focusing just on the organizational influences and the preconditions, right? Because remember, we're in the age where safety accidents are an organizational issue rather than a personal issue. And SMS can help here, right? We can see, especially down in the green, there is a huge percentage of organizational and cultural process that are responsible for it. A lot of planning, and then self-evaluations that risk management helps with. All right, some key points to bridge the gap, right? We want to make sure that we're not infringing on the flexibility of Part 61 training. I think that's a huge selling point. I've done a lot of 141 training, and I just recently finished up some 61 training. There are a lot of pros and cons to each, but for example, for me, I find the flexibility that Part 61 offers amazing, right? I can go out and fly with my instructor and say, hey, this is what I want to work on today, and we can go do that. With 141, you're stuck to a syllabus, and that's what you have to do on this flight. Flight number 7 is slow flight, that's what you're doing, or you have to repeat flight number 6. So the key points here is that these key parts of SMS do not actually add any unnecessary rigor, right? SMS is about decision making, safety, doesn't need to be expensive, and it should be tailored to the business operation. So regardless of where your institution sits, key components of SMS can be integrated in there that give you both the benefits of safety and financial benefits. All right, so let's go over some of these benefits. So we've got enhanced safety outcomes, right? So we've learned that structured environments are a positive for safety. It encourages us to identify hazards and mitigate risk. Eventually, there is cost saving through risk reduction. So this can be in the form of the very quick by reduced insurance costs, right? You can go to your insurance carrier and say, here's my safety policy. And obviously, by having and living a safety culture, we reduce the likelihood of accidents, making us even more attractive. So there is a direct benefit to doing this if the motivation is financial. Additionally, right, who doesn't want to go to a school that can say, hey, we have a strong safety culture, right? Your reputation and marketability goes up. Even if you're a one-man show and you have a living document and you model safety, that's going to be a school where students want to learn. For me, safety is huge. I've got 2 kids, a wonderful wife. I want to be here for them tomorrow, and I don't want to fly so bad that I'm willing to sacrifice safety for that. All right. We can show continuous improvement. This is a thing that 141 does regularly through audits. They have to be prepared for FAA inspections at any time. So you always want to make sure that you leave today better than yesterday. It shows that you're being proactive. All right. And also, we've got increased operational efficiency, right? Safety obviously factors into the bottom line. So if we're doing things like, for instance, emphasizing checklists and landing speeds, right? These things can directly translate into fewer maintenance issues and thereby fewer costs. All right, so let's take a look at how to implement some of these strategies into a smaller 140 Part 61 school. Right, so the first topic here is we want to implement a scalable SMS. We don't have to stop operations for a month and write a 400-page SMS with an operating procedures guide, 400 different checklists. We can start small, right? Just formalizing your mission statement for safety is already a good step, right? It gives people something to aspire to. We can foster a just culture where even if the reporting is by text message after a flight, hey, so I had a rough landing, I overestimated or underestimated the crosswind, and I think I bit off more than I could chew, right? So if that's met with a positive response, we're working towards fostering a better culture. Again, this is free, right? By encouraging a good reporting culture. Again, this can be a text message, it can be a Google sheet that's anonymous, right? We are proactively instituting a reporting culture. We're keeping track of reports so that we can look back and see, hey, so we've got 10 guys that did this thing. How do we address it? Another good way to implement these strategies is by engaging the stakeholders. So let's involve everybody. If we've got 10 people that are involved with the school, a couple instructors and some students, let's get everybody together and say, hey, let's talk about safety. What would you guys like to see? Where can we do better? And then finally, regularly audit your safety program. Again, free. It does take time, right? But if even once a month we start looking at all the reports and all the comments, right, we can start to learn and make corrective actions to keep accidents from happening in the first place, right? So a big part of this is safety assurance, right? We do this through regular audits. We report incidents and near misses, right? Remember, near misses are free opportunities for learning. Nothing bad happened, but it could have. So let's learn from it. Didn't cost anything, right? We want to continuously check our risk assessment and regularly update that. Keeping that feedback loop open, right? We want to make sure that when we learn, we disseminate the knowledge and we get feedback from the learners to make sure that we keep working towards that ideal operation. And then again, the data, right? If we're collecting reports, do something with the reports. It can be as simple as hanging up a list of the reports from this month. Or, you can get really complex and have a big status board showing, hey, here are this month's hot topics, right? How can we improve on those? All right, so the basic challenges to implementation, right? Costs. So start small and scale up. Since this isn't mandatory yet, right? We can start small, add over time, and in a year or so, you'll have a wonderful safety program. Resistance to change is a big one, right? No one wants to have a safety policy stuffed down their throat. So let's get everyone together and we want to show them the value of safety and we want to show that we care, right? Because we do care. Nobody wants to see anybody get hurt out there, right? In flight training, we quickly become friends with everyone that we work and train with. So we want to make sure that when we're implementing this SMS, it really is about saving lives, keeping people safe, and not just about a mandated requirement by the FAA. Right? And the biggest one, I think, we want to balance the flexibility with structure. So yes, we want to continue to maintain that Part 61 flexibility, but we want to do it in a way that we're not getting lost. So we can start with simple things like ensuring consistency in pre-flight across instructors and students, right? Have one way that you teach the basic pre-flight, let people adapt to it, right? But let's keep the core concept of, hey, we got to check all these things. I don't care what order you check them in, but let's get them all checked. We're not getting away from the data-driven stuff, right? So this is a big hurdle. If your managers or your ground, like boots on the ground, don't feel very comfortable managing spreadsheets, managing, iPads, find a way to do that. You have to do something with the data that you collect because otherwise you're not really learning from anything. And the last one is addressing the time constraints. Don't give yourself a time constraint. Say, hey, you know what? By the end of this year, I will implement some form of policy and then take your time. And if you don't meet the goal, that's okay, right? There's no formal requirement, but keep track of that. And then you kind of realize if you can't meet your safety timelines that you want, you can take that as an idea of the type of safety culture that you're fostering. If you're not finding the time to do this stuff, are you really being safe? Big one here is the role of leadership, right? Leaders set the tone of their organization. We talked about this a little bit before. If your leaders are flagrantly violating the basic policies that you've put in place, we're not really fostering the correct kind of safety culture. We want to make sure the entire organization is on board. And like our definition said, this is a top-down approach, right? So we have to model the behavior, and then other people will follow. All right, just culture, big one, right? If leaders are saying that, yes, we have a just culture, report your errors, you won't get in trouble, and the first thing they do is punish someone who made a mistake, right? This is also going to trickle down, and staff and students aren't going to feel safe reporting errors, right? They might have had a really hard landing, but they're not going to say anything because you build them for the flat spot on the tire. So you're really having a detrimental effect on safety when you punish people for trying to do the right thing. And this goes hand in hand with providing support and clear communication, right? We want to make sure that everybody understands the importance of safety, and we want to support them, whether that's with training, education, or just good feedback, right? We want to recognize positive events just as much as we want to recognize the errors that we see. All right, so how do we engage students and instructors, right? Your boots on the ground. There's a lot of ways to do it, but there's some fun, cheap ways, right? Maybe you could have a monthly session where the first person to report an issue gets a free gift card, or you give an hour of flight time for every 10 valid safety reports somebody gets, or you give them a funny hat. Everybody likes funny hats, and they're generally cheap. Or something as simple as a front row parking spot with their name on it. This doesn't have to be fancy, but it's cool to park in front of the hangar, right? And why not reward people in a way that costs you nothing but makes them feel valued? Other people will see this stuff and, I want a funny hat. So it kind of brings everybody on board. And if you make a day out of it or an evening out of it, maybe a monthly barbecue, where you announce some of these things and you talk about the safety issues in a relaxed and casual atmosphere, right? Safety meetings don't need to happen with a suit and tie around a conference table. They need to happen where people want to be. So if for the price of a few hot dogs and some hamburgers, you get buy-in from everybody, then let's do it, right? All right, so the big takeaway here, right? We've covered all the kind of key points, but this is a trap that a lot of organizations fall into. Safety starts with you. Sure, that is a slogan, right? But what does that mean? And we can come up with a ton of different ones, but they should be meaningful. So for my presentation, I've come up with this, right? So we build on safety, not on sand. I really love the verse, and I love kind of the thought behind it. We need to make sure that our foundations for safety are built on trust, and they're built on actively caring for the people around you, right? Building a community. You can also have a more fun one, right? I really like this one. Get out there, be safe, and don't explode. Each of these has their own meaning and message. Safety can be fun. It doesn't have to be boring, right? But it should be memorable, and we want to make sure that people take it to heart. All right. Thanks for listening. This is kind of just an add-on. My thoughts on a capstone project would be to kind of work with a local Part 61 school and implement a just SMS framework. So just kind of the bare bones. We can start with a gap analysis of a current safety program, document procedures, and then figure out ways to bridge those gaps, right? With the deliverable being a basic SMS framework, with a simple safety policy, risk management plan, assurance plan, and some kind of safety promotion plan. The big thing is to spend no money, right? We want to show that safety doesn't have to cost anything. If we can do it for free, let's do it for free. While we can't really put a cost on safety, we can do what we can. Put out some effort instead of putting out money, right? Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed my presentation. If you've got any questions, please reach out. And here's some information on my sources. Have a wonderful day.